I worked for Kevin Costner, and one night, over a glass of wine in his private study, he told me that Whitney Houston's death was a ritual, not a metaphor, not some Hollywood superstition, a ritual. He said it the way someone might tell you about the weather. Calm, matter of fact, like he was explaining something obvious that I should have already understood. I have kept this secret for over a decade. I have moved 6 times, changed my name twice, but I cannot stay silent anymore. This is what he told me. I got the job in September 2011. A friend of a friend knew someone on Costner's team, and they needed a personal assistant. Someone discreet. Someone who could handle the chaos of a celebrity's life without asking too many questions. I was 26 years old, fresh out of film school, and desperate to break into Hollywood. When they offered me the position, I signed the NDA without even reading it. 15 pages of legal threats about what would happen if I ever spoke about anything I saw or heard. I signed it with a smile on my face. The first month was everything I dreamed it would be. I managed his schedule, screened his calls, picked up dry cleaning, arranged meetings. Costner was charming in that old school movie star way. He remembered my coffee order. He asked about my family, but there was something underneath the charm that I could not quite name. His eyes were wrong. When he looked at you, it felt like he was looking through you, past you, at something only he could see. Sometimes, mid-conversation, he would go completely still, like a machine powering down. Then he would blink, smile, and continue talking as if nothing had happened. His house in California was massive, 12 bedrooms, a private theater, grounds that stretched for acres. But the place I noticed most was the study on the 2nd floor at the end of a long hallway. The door was always locked. No one was allowed inside. Not the housekeeper, not his manager, not even his closest friends. I would see him disappear into that room for hours, sometimes well past midnight. I would stand at the bottom of the stairs and hear his voice drifting down. He was talking to someone, or something. The words were muffled, but the tone was clear. He was pleading, negotiating, and then silence. One afternoon in late October, I was organizing his calendar when I noticed a strange pattern. Every film he had ever done, every major role, had a corresponding date circled in red in an old leather planner he kept in his desk drawer. I cross-referenced the dates with public records out of curiosity. Each red circle aligned with a death. A stunt coordinator on one film, a producer's wife on another, a co-star's brother. Some were accidents, some were ruled natural causes. But every single one happened within 6 months of the film's release, right when Costner was doing press tours, right when his face was everywhere. I told myself it was coincidence. Hollywood is a dangerous industry. People die. But the timing was too perfect, too precise. And the way he marked those dates, the care he took in writing them down, felt deliberate. It felt like documentation. I started watching him more closely after that. The way he would stare at photographs from old sets. The way he touched certain props he kept in glass cases. The way he whispered to himself when he thought no one was listening. But I had no idea what I was actually looking at. Not yet. What I found in that locked study would change everything. November came, and with it, a growing obsession I could not shake. Every night after work, I would sit in my apartment with my laptop open, digging through archives, old news articles, obituaries. I was building a timeline, film by film, death by death. And the more I uncovered, The more my hands shook. Dances with Wolves, 1990. Best Picture, Costner at the height of his fame. During post-production, a Lakota elder who had consulted on the film died suddenly of a heart attack. He was 43 years old. No prior health conditions. The production held a quiet memorial. Costner gave a speech about honoring indigenous voices. Everyone moved on. JFK, 1991. Costner playing a man obsessed with conspiracy and death. 3 weeks before the film's premiere, a researcher who had provided historical documents to Oliver Stone was found dead in his home. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Accidental, they said. The heater malfunctioned, but the researcher had called a friend the day before, claiming someone had been following him, claiming he knew too much about things that were supposed to stay buried. A Perfect World, 1993. Costner as a fugitive who kidnaps a child. The film explored violence, loss, and redemption. 2 months after release, the stunt double who worked on the film died in a car accident. Single vehicle collision. He drove off a cliff on a road he had driven 1,000 times before. No skid marks, no signs of braking. Like he just decided to go. Over the edge. The pattern was there. Clear as daylight once you knew to look for it. But it was not just the deaths themselves. It was the way they connected to the themes of his roles. A film about protecting the innocent. Someone close to production loses protection. A film about conspiracy. Someone who knows too much dies mysteriously. A film about a man who cannot escape his past. Someone is killed by something that should have been routine. I made a spreadsheet. Columns for film title, release date, Costner's character, and corresponding death. By the time I finished, I had documented 14 deaths across 20 years. 14 people who had some connection, however small, to Kevin Costner's most critically acclaimed work. And every single one of them died when Costner needed them to. When his performance required weight. When the role demanded something more than acting. But the worst discovery came when I started researching The Bodyguard. 1992. Costner as a man who fails to protect the woman he loves. A man haunted by his inability to save her. Except in the film, Rachel survives. The bodyguard succeeds. He keeps her alive. I found interviews from that time. Costner talked about how the ending felt wrong to him. How a real bodyguard who falls in love would be consumed by the fear of failure. How the emotional truth of the role was in the loss, not the victory. He pushed for a darker ending. The studio refused. Test audiences wanted the happy resolution. So the film ended with Rachel alive. The bodyguard walking away, his job complete, but Costner never stopped talking about it. In interview after interview over the years, he returned to that film, to that role. He called it unfinished business. He said he never got to explore the gene truth of that character, the devastating, soul-crushing failure that comes when you cannot save the person you are meant to protect. And then I found the photograph, posted on a fan site buried in a gallery of behind-the-scenes images from The Bodyguard's production. Costner and Whitney Houston on set, standing near a piano. They are both smiling, but in the background, barely visible, there is a mirror. And in that mirror's reflection, you can see Costner's face. He's not smiling. His expression is cold, hungry. He's staring at Whitney like she is something he intends to consume. I printed that photograph. I stared at it for hours, and I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. The The Bodyguard was the only major Costner film where no one died during production or shortly after release. It was the only one where the pattern broke, the only film where the sacrifice never came, which meant the debt was still owed. The role was still incomplete, and Kevin Costner had spent 20 years waiting to finish what he started. I looked at my spreadsheet again. The last entry was from 2008. 3 years had passed since the most recent death, the longest gap in the entire timeline. It was like watching a clock run down. Like something had been building, waiting, preparing for the right moment to collect what it was owed. I did not know it then, but I was watching a man prepare for his masterpiece, and Whitney Houston's name was already written in his ledger. It happened on a Thursday night in late November. Costner had gone out to dinner with his agent. He would be gone for hours. The house was empty, except for me, finishing up emails in the downstairs office. I should have left. I should have gone home. But I kept thinking about that locked study, about the voices I heard through the door, about the pattern I had uncovered and the terrible certainty growing in my chest that I was working for someone who had done unspeakable things. I walked up the stairs slowly. Each step creaked under my weight. The hallway stretched ahead of me, dark except for a thin line of moonlight coming through the window at the far end. And there, at the end of that hallway, was the study.
Door. It was open. Not wide, just a crack, like an invitation or like a test. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Incense and something else. Something organic and decaying, like flowers left too long in a vase. The room was smaller than I expected. No windows. Walls painted a deep red that looked almost black in the dim light. And covering every inch of those walls were photographs. Pictures of Costner in costume. Costner on set. Costner at premieres. But between those images were newspaper clippings, obituaries, death notices, and someone had drawn lines connecting them. Red string, like something out of a detective's conspiracy board linking each role to each death. Dances with Wolves to the Lakota elder, JFK to the researcher, A Perfect World to the stunt double. On and on. The whole wall was a map of his career built on corpses. In the center of the room was a desk. On that desk was a leather
Journal, thick and old, the edges worn soft from years of handling. I opened it. The handwriting was Costner's. I recognized it from the notes he left around the house, but these words were different. Fevered, obsessive. Pages and pages of entries that read like instructions, like recipes. The role must be fed. The character cannot live unless something else dies. This is the trade. This is the craft. The old ones knew it. Brando knew it. Olivier knew it. They just never spoke it aloud. But I will not hide from the truth. To embody death, you must author it. To play failure, you must fail someone who trusts you. To become the role, you must give the role what it hungers for. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the journal. There were sketches, symbols I did not recognize, circles within circles, stars with too many points, words and languages that looked ancient and wrong. And then I found the list. A column of names written in black ink on the left side of the page. Each one had a date next to it. Each date corresponded to a death I had already documented, but at the bottom of that list, written in red ink, was a name that stopped my heart. Whitney Houston. And next to it, a date. February 11, 2012, 3 months away. I staggered back from the desk, my vision blurred. This was not research. This was not coincidence. This was a plan, a schedule. And Whitney Houston was marked for death the same way all the others had been. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and started taking pictures. The walls, the journal, the list. Every piece of evidence I could capture. I did not know what I would do with it. I did not know who would believe me. But I needed proof. I needed something to hold on to when my mind tried to convince me I had imagined it all. That was when I saw the altar. In the corner of the room, half hidden behind a tall bookshelf. Candles arranged in a triangle. In the center of the triangle was a photograph of Whitney from The Bodyguard. She was young in the picture, radiant, smiling. And someone had burned the edges of the photograph just slightly so that the flames seemed to be crawling toward her face. Surrounding the photograph were personal items, a lock of hair tied with black ribbon, a piece of jewelry, a small gold earring that glinted in the candlelight. Things that should not have been in Kevin Costner's possession. Things that belonged to her. And beneath it all, scratched into the wooden surface of the altar, were words I could barely make out in the dim light. The bodyguard fails. The role completes. The debt is paid. I heard the front door open downstairs, footsteps in the foyer. Costner was home early. Panic flooded my system. I shoved my phone in my pocket, backed out of the study, and pulled the door almost closed, leaving it just as I had found it. I ran down the hallway as quietly as I could, my pulse screaming in my ears, and made it to the office just as I heard him, climbing the stairs. I sat at the computer, pretending to work, my whole body shaking. He walked past the office door without looking in. I heard his footsteps stop at the study. Heard the door creak open. Heard him go inside and close it behind him. And then I heard something worse. Laughter. Soft and satisfied. Like he knew exactly what I had done. He was not angry. He was pleased. 3 days passed. I said nothing. I avoided him as much as I could, taking tasks that kept me out of the house. Running errands. Picking up packages across town. Anything to delay the inevitable. Because I knew. He knew. The way he looked at me had changed. There was amusement in his eyes now. Like we were sharing a secret. Like I had been initiated into something I could never walk away from. On the 4th day, he invited me to dinner. Not a request, a command delivered with that easy charm that made it impossible to refuse. I'm making pasta tonight. Join me, we should talk. The way he said, talk, made my stomach drop, but I nodded. I smiled. I pretended everything was fine. He cooked in the massive kitchen while I sat at the island watching his hands move with practiced precision, chopping garlic, stirring sauce, opening a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my rent. He poured 2 glasses and slid one across the counter to me. I did not drink it. He noticed. He smiled. "You went into my study," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. I opened my mouth to deny it, but he raised a hand. "Do not insult me. I have cameras, small ones. You would not notice them unless you knew where to look. I saw everything you saw. I watched you photograph my journal. I watched you discover the altar." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving mine. "And I watched you run." I should have left. I should have stood up and walked out of that house and never looked back. But I was frozen, paralyzed by fear and something else. Morbid fascination. The same impulse that makes people slow. Down to look at car accidents. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to hear him explain. "You think I am a monster," he said, plating the pasta with careful attention. "You think I have killed people to feed my career, and you are not wrong. But you are not right either, because this is not about killing. This is about craft. This is about understanding what it truly means to inhabit a role." He set the plate in front of me. Steam rose from the pasta, carrying the scent of basil and garlic. My stomach turned. He sat across from me and leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Do you know what separates a good actor from a great one? Truth. Not the truth of memory or imagination, the truth of experience. You cannot play a man who has lost someone unless you have felt that loss. You cannot play a man who has failed unless you have tasted failure. And you cannot play a man who has killed unless you have taken a life." I found my voice, thin and shaking. "You are insane." He laughed. It was not the laugh of a madman. It was warm, genuine, like I had told a charming joke. "I am the sanest person you will ever meet. I understand the transaction. Every great performance requires sacrifice. The old actors knew this. Brando destroyed himself to play Colonel Kurtz. Daniel Day-Lewis broke his body for Lincoln, but they stopped short of the final truth. They hurt themselves. They did not hurt others. And that is why their performances, brilliant as they were, remained incomplete." He took a bite of pasta, chewing slowly, savoring it. "The bodyguard was my failure. I played a man who could not save the woman he loved, but the studio made her live. They robbed me of the truth. For 20 years, I have carried that role around like an open wound, unfinished, unresolved. The character has been screaming inside me, demanding completion, demanding the failure he was always meant to experience." My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter. "Whitney," I whispered, "you are going to kill Whitney Houston." "No." He said it so simply, so calmly. "I am not going to kill her. I am going to complete the role. There is a difference. Her death is not murder. It is the final scene, the one we never got to film, the one that makes everything we did in that movie matter. When she dies, the bodyguard will finally truly fail, and the role will be whole." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His skin was cold. "You were meant to find that study. You were meant to see what you saw. Because every great work needs a witness. Someone who understands what was sacrificed to create it. You are that witness now. You are part of this. And when she dies, you will know that you watched a masterpiece being born." I ripped my hand away from his and stood up so fast the chair fell backward. "You are a monster. I am going to the police. I am going to tell them everything." He did not move, did not react. He just smiled. "Go ahead. Show them your photographs. Tell them your story. They will think you are insane. Or worse, they will think you are trying to extort me. No evidence, no proof. Just the ramblings of a disgruntled assistant who got too close to something they could not understand. You signed an NDA, remember? You tell this story, and I will bury you." I backed toward the door. He took another sip of wine. "But you will not tell anyone," he said, "because part of you wants to see if I am right. Part of you needs to know if this is real." He was right, and that terrified me more than anything else. I did not go to the police. I told myself I would. I told myself I was gathering more evidence, building a stronger case, waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. I was afraid. Afraid of being destroyed. Afraid of being wrong. And somewhere deep in the rotting core of my conscience, I was afraid of missing it. Afraid of not being there to see if he could actually do what he claimed. January 2012 arrived like a funeral procession. Slow, inevitable, heavy with the weight of something terrible approaching. Costner's behavior shifted. He became focused in a way I had never seen before. He stopped taking meetings, stopped returning calls from his agent. He would spend entire days in that study, the door locked, his voice rising and falling in rhythms that sounded like chanting. Sometimes I would press my ear to the door and hear him speaking her name. Whitney, Whitney, Whitney. Over and over until it stopped sounding like a name and started sounding like a summoning. He began visiting places connected to the bodyguard. I drove him to locations where they had filmed scenes. An estate in the hills where they shot the exterior of Rachel's mansion. A hotel in downtown Los Angeles where they stayed during production. He would stand in these places for hours, silent, his eyes closed, his lips moving soundlessly. Once, at the hotel, a woman recognized him and asked for an autograph. He signed it without looking at her, his hand moving automatically, his mind somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark. On January 15th, I found burn marks on the floor of the study. Perfect circles, 3 of them arranged in a triangle. The wood was scorched black, and the smell of something chemical and wrong hung in the air. On his desk was a new addition to the altar, a newspaper clipping about Whitney's recent struggles, erratic behavior at performances, concerns from friends and family. The media was already circling her like vultures, sensing weakness, smelling blood, and Costner had highlighted certain phrases in red ink. Losing control, spiraling, friends fear the worst. He was tracking her decline like a scientist monitoring an experiment, documenting the signs, watching the pieces fall into place. And the worst part, the part that still makes me sick to remember, is that I said nothing. I watched him prepare for her death, and I remained silent, complicit. A witness just like he said I would be. Late January, he received a phone call. I was in the next room and heard his side of the conversation. Yes, I will be there, of course, for Clive, for her. He hung up, and I saw something flash across his face. Satisfaction, triumph. He walked past me and said, almost casually, Whitney will be at the Beverly Hilton for Clive Davis's pre-Grammy party, February 11th. I have been invited to attend. The way he said the date made my skin crawl, like he was announcing a wedding, like he was counting down to something beautiful. February arrived, and Costner became almost manic. He started performing rituals every night. I would hear him in the study past midnight, his voice rising to shouts, then dropping to whispers, then rising again. The smell of burning herbs drifted through the house constantly. Sage and something sharper, more acrid, something that made my eyes water and my head ache. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping as far as I could tell. His eyes developed dark circles, but his energy never flagged. He was running on something that was not human. Something that had been building for 20 years and was finally about to be released. On February 9th, 2 days before the party, I found him standing in front of the altar in his study. The door was wide open. He wanted me to see. He was holding the photograph of Whitney, the one with the burned edges, and he was speaking to it. You were always meant for this. The role was never complete without you. You gave me Rachel. Now you will give me the truth of her loss. you will make me whole." He turned and saw me standing in the doorway. He did not look surprised. He did not look guilty. He looked radiant. "It is almost time," he said. "Can you feel it? The energy shifting, the universe aligning. This is what destiny feels like. This is what it means to be an artist who understands the true cost of greatness." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him and shake him and tell him he was insane, that he was delusional, that none of this was real. But I could not, because standing there in that room, surrounded by the symbols and the candles and the overwhelming stench of his obsession, I felt it too. Something was happening. Something was building. The air felt thick, electric, like the moments before a lightning strike. And I knew, with a certainty that crushed me, that Whitney Houston was gonna die. On February 10th, the day before the party, Costner did not go into the study at all. He spent the day by the pool, reading a book, sipping coffee, acting completely normal, like a man who had finished his work, like a man waiting for the results. He even smiled at me when I brought him lunch. "You should watch the news tomorrow," he said. "It is going to be a significant day." I did not sleep that night. I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, waiting for the world to confirm what I already knew. I was at the house when the news broke. It was late afternoon, nearly 6 o'clock. I was sorting through mail in the kitchen when my phone started buzzing. Text messages flooding in from friends. Breaking news alerts lighting up the screen. I opened one and the words blurred in front of my eyes. "Whitney Houston found dead. Beverly Hilton Hotel. Unresponsive in bathtub. 48 years old." My legs gave out. I dropped onto the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinets, the phone shaking in my hands. It was real. He had done it. Or something had done it. Or the universe had bent itself to his will. I did not know which was worse. The phone kept buzzing. More alerts, more messages. The entire world was reacting to her death, and I was sitting on a kitchen floor choking on the knowledge that I could have stopped it. I heard footsteps. Costner walked into the kitchen, already dressed in a suit, his hair perfectly combed. He looked at me on the floor, and his expression was not concern. It was not even surprise. It was satisfaction. Pure, undiluted satisfaction. "You have heard," he said. Not a question. I could not speak. I could only stare at him. He poured himself a glass of water from the sink, drank it slowly, then set the glass down with careful precision. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet but filled with something almost reverent. "The bodyguard is finally complete. 20 years I have carried that character. 20 years of incompleteness, of knowing I never got to explore the truth of his failure. And now, finally, I have felt it. The devastation, the collapse, the absolute destruction of knowing you could not save the person you were meant to protect." He turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his eyes that made me want to vomit. He looked younger, healthier, like something had been drained from him and replaced with vitality, like he had fed on her death and it had nourished him in ways food and sleep never could. "You do not understand," he continued. "This was not murder. This was completion. She was always meant to be part of this story. The universe has been waiting for this moment since we filmed that movie. She played Rachel. I played Frank, but we never got to the Jen ending. The studio took that from us. They gave audiences a happy ending because they were cowards. But I am not a coward. I understand that art requires blood. It requires loss. And now, the role has what it always needed. I found my voice, raw and broken. She had a daughter. She had a life. You took that from her. He shook his head slowly. I took nothing. I completed something. There is a difference. Her death was always written into the fabric of this. From the moment we started filming The Bodyguard, her fate was sealed. I just had to wait for the right time, for the moment when the sacrifice would mean something, when it would transform the role from good to transcendent. My phone buzzed again. More news. Tributes pouring in. The world mourning. And Costner stood in his kitchen talking about her death like it was a creative achievement, like it was something to be proud of. You will see, he said, his voice almost gentle now. In the coming weeks, the offers will flood in. Producers who have not called in years will suddenly remember I exist. Scripts will arrive. Projects that require someone who understands grief, who understands failure, who has lived through the then weight of loss. Because now I have. Now I carry it in every cell of my body. Whitney's death has made me a better actor. It has given me access to emotions I could never reach before. This is the trade. This is the craft. He walked past me toward the door, pausing only to place a hand on my shoulder. I flinched. His touch felt like ice. You were the witness, he said. That matters. That makes you part of the art. When people watch The Bodyguard now, when they see me standing over Rachel's body in that imagined scene I never got to film, they will feel something Jen, something real, because somewhere in the invisible architecture of the universe, Whitney's death has retroactively completed that film. It has given it the ending it always needed. He left. I heard his car pull out of the driveway. He was going somewhere to celebrate, probably, to toast his achievement, to bask in the satisfaction of a job finally finished. And I sat on that kitchen floor for 3 hours, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything except stare at my phone as the world mourned a woman whose death I could have prevented. That night, I watched the news coverage. They showed footage of the Beverly Hilton, reporters speculating about what happened, friends and family devastated, Clive Davis's party canceled, the music industry in shock. And through it all, I kept thinking about Costner's face, the satisfaction, the youth, the way he looked like he had been reborn. 3 days later, he attended her funeral. He gave a eulogy. I watched it on television from a hotel room 3 states away. I had quit the morning after her death, packed my things, and run. But I could not run from what I knew. And what I knew was that Kevin Costner had killed Whitney Houston to complete a performance. I watched his eulogy from a motel room in Nevada. The television was old, the picture grainy, but I could see him clearly enough. Kevin Costner standing at the podium in the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, his face a perfect mask of grief. He spoke about Whitney's talent, her generosity, her light. He told a story about filming The Bodyguard, about how she had been nervous to act, how he had encouraged her, told her she was going to be great. The congregation nodded. People wept. He was flawless. But I heard something else beneath his words, a subtext that crawled under my skin like insects. When he said, "I will always love you," it was not nostalgia. It was ownership. When he said, "She has left us," he emphasized the word left, like it was a gift she had given him. When he spoke about her fear and vulnerability on set, he described them with the intimacy of someone who had studied those qualities, cataloged them, planned to exploit them. "You were as beautiful as a woman could be," he said, his voice breaking at exactly the right moment. The cameras captured tears on his face, but I knew those tears. I had seen that expression before, in his study, when he spoke about completing his roles. Those were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of accomplishment. He was crying because he had finally finished what he started 20 years ago. Near the end of the eulogy, he said something that made my blood freeze. I told her I would be her bodyguard, and I was, right up to the end. The congregation took it as a statement of loyalty, a promise kept, but I heard the truth buried in those words. He had been her bodyguard. And bodyguards, according to his twisted logic, must fail, must lose the person they are, meant to protect. He was confessing, admitting to the entire world that he had authored her death. And no one understood what they were hearing. The eulogy lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes of coded confession delivered to thousands of people who heard only a grieving friend honoring a lost icon. But I heard the truth. I heard him claiming credit, announcing his victory to the world while pretending to mourn. When he stepped away from the podium, he looked lighter, unburdened. A man who had completed his life's work and could finally rest. After the funeral, I disappeared. I changed my name, moved to a small town in the Midwest where no one knew who I was or where I had come from. I destroyed my phone, my laptop, anything that could connect me to my old life. I told myself I was protecting myself from Costner, from his lawyers, from whatever dark influence he commanded. But that was only part of it. The real reason I ran was simpler. I could not live with what I knew and did nothing about. The years passed. I worked dead-end jobs, avoided newspapers, television, anything that might show me his face, but I could not escape him entirely. I would see his movies advertised, see his name in headlines, and each time I would remember the study, the altar, the satisfied look on his face when Whitney died, the way he had looked younger, stronger, fed. In 2014, I heard he was cast in a new project, a limited series where he played a father searching for his missing daughter. The premise alone made my stomach turn. A man desperate to save someone. A man consumed by the fear of loss. I researched it obsessively, the old paranoia flooding back. And then I found it. A production assistant on the show, a young woman barely 25 years old, died in a car accident during filming. Single vehicle collision. No witnesses. She drove off a mountain road on a clear day with perfect visibility. I printed the article, added it to the folder I kept hidden in my closet. The folder filled with obituaries, newspaper clippings, and photographs I had taken in his study before I ran. The evidence I was too afraid to show anyone because I knew how insane it would make me sound. The pattern had not stopped. It had only been waiting. Costner had taken 2 years to rest, to let the energy of Whitney's death sustain him. And then it started again, feeding the roles, completing the performances, demanding blood. I realized then that Whitney Houston was not his masterpiece. She was the completion of unfinished business, but his appetite had not been satisfied. It had only grown stronger, and I knew with sickening certainty that he would never stop. I am telling this story now because I cannot carry it anymore. Because every time I see Kevin Costner's face on a screen, I see a predator who has perfected his hunt. He told me Whitney Houston's death was a ritual, and I watched him complete it. I watched him feed on her death and become stronger. I watched the world celebrate him while she was buried. He is still working, still taking roles, still attending premieres with that charming smile. And I know, with absolute certainty, that he is not finished. The bodyguard curse is not a curse at all. It is a method, a practice, a craft he has refined over decades. Every role demands blood, and Kevin Costner has learned exactly how to provide it. I was his witness, and now you are too. Watch his next film. Watch who dies around it, and you will know I am telling the truth.